And there we go. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. I can't tell you how excited I am about this phone call because it represents, or this webinar, I should say. Phone is an ancient tool that we used to use to communicate back in the days before there was the internet. But I'm excited about this webinar in particular because it represents an intersection of two of my loves. The bugs. I'm a bug lover, love anything having to do with insects, and cell-based meat, which is another incredibly niche field. And I've been watching future fields now for a few years, quietly lurking. They didn't realize that I'd been paying attention to them all these times, reading all their press releases and stuff like that. So this is a true joy to welcome them here to this webinar and ask them some questions and learn more about their company and their business. And I'm really happy to be joined by two phenomenal co-hosts today. So this might be the last point you really hear my voice during this conversation. For those who don't know me, my name is Andrew Rose. I think most of you do know who I am. I'm a futurist for agriculture, food, and the climate. And I'm a very curious person, and I love the quirky and novel as well in the world. So this is, again, I'm happy to be in the audience for this one. What I'm going to do is quickly introduce our two hosts here and then turn the baton over to Christina. First is Rache Brand. Rache and I have known each other for over a decade, probably pushing 2 decades or so, and we've been fast social media friends. Very few opportunities to press the flesh in person, but we've been close friends, and we certainly are on the same frequency. And Rach, why don't you give a little background about who you are and kind of what your excitement levels are on these types of things?
Sure. Well, thank you so much, Andrew. And it's really nice to meet everyone on the phone today. My background has been kind of plagued, I would say, a little bit about my history in food allergies. I started with a very weird food allergy growing up, which is citric acid, not a common one. Took a while to figure out. And so as a result, my entire life has kind of been surrounded by food. I currently focus on food as medicine. I'm an investor. I come from the debt lending side, and my goal is to help companies get to a point of break even. And with that, we see systemic change. So 80% of our portfolio is currently Black, Brown, and Latin or female founders. Very proud of that. We have about $78 million currently deployed, and we are looking to make investments in companies who are really looking to scale. Part of the work that we do is in synergies and helping to figure out a way or a platform to get them really into market. So I'm especially excited to talk to you guys, mostly because novel products are incredibly important to the growth and success of our future, but also because I feel like there's an opportunity to really lean into some of the products in market today and see how we can all work collaboratively together.
Excellent. Well, I need to work on my introduction, I tell you that. And then I'll turn the microphone over to Christina. Christina and I have actually never met in person. We certainly have interacted many, many times in meetings like this, and I've always enjoyed her questions and her line of thinking. Hopefully we will, or I know we will meet in Fargo later this month, so that should be fun. But Christina, why don't you introduce yourself, and I'll turn the microphone over to you.
All right. Yeah, Andrew, I don't know if I'll recognize you without your headphones when we do meet. So if you could just wear those until we find each other in Fargo. So nice to be here. Thank you, Andrew, for inviting me, and to the others that are going to be with us today. Thanks for coming, and looking forward to this conversation. So just really briefly, I am with the Canadian government. So I work for the Consulate General of Canada in Minneapolis, which means that I cover a 5-state area for Canada in terms of business development. So I help Canadian companies that are looking at trade and investment in Minnesota, Iowa, Nebraska, South Dakota, and North Dakota. And my role is specific to food and agriculture. I've done a lot in the food tech and ag tech space. So this kind of conversation was what I really love. So I'm looking forward to today's conversation. And in a moment, I'll introduce Jalene and Matt, who will be our feature company today. But just to paint a quick picture of agriculture and ag tech in Canada, because I don't get to give a lot of commercials for it, so I will. So Canada is actually the 7th largest globally for arable land in the world. And because of that, agriculture is hugely important to Canada's economy. It employs 1 in 8 people. And by 2025, Canada expects to be exporting more than $75 billion in agricultural products. So obviously there's a huge history there. Always agriculture has been part of the backbone of the economy, but innovation in agriculture has been accelerating very rapidly. I've been in this role 7 years, and it seems like it's changed just a ton in that time frame, especially in terms of the types of support and sort of ecosystem building there is in Canada for ag tech and food tech. So specifically things like the Canadian government has supported the beginning of something called super clusters, where they invest a ton of money into one specific type of innovation to sort of supercharge it and help it kind of reach next level. And one of those has been in the alt protein space. Academically, there's things like the Old College Smart Farm in Alberta, with lots of sort of demonstration around autonomy in farming. Many accelerators now where there just really weren't any just a few years ago in ag tech. So SVG Thrive has now a Canadian accelerator. There's BioEnterprise that does sort of commercialization acceleration. There's RH Accelerator, Zona Ag Tech in Quebec. And then we, as Canadian government employees, we run something called the Ag Tech Canadian Technology Accelerator. And then investment as well. And this is where I find the most sort of exciting movement, because almost every day I hear of, yet another firm in Canada that is investing more in ag tech, either as a standalone industry or as an addition to the rest of their portfolio. So firms like Avrio, TELUS, IVAC Group. Just yesterday, I had a conversation with a new one called Tallgrass. So whereas, 5 years ago, I was saying, look to the US for investment, and I still do because that's part of my job. Like, there's a lot in Canada as well. So I'm super excited today to have you hear from Future Fields, which is, just coming on the stage with a fantastic new technology, and they'll tell you all about it. So I'm just going to introduce them. Jalene Anderson-Baron is a co-founder and COO of Edmonton-based biotech company Future Fields. She has an MA from the University of Alberta, and she's authored over 10 peer-reviewed publications before turning to her entrepreneurial spirits. She has extensive experience in health and social research, policy analysis, and novel regulatory frameworks. And prior to founding of Future Fields, her work ranged from sustainability program at a large-scale post-secondary institution to coordinating national and local level policy advocacy efforts. Jalene is passionate about food security and sustainability and believes deeply in the potential for new innovation to combat climate change. And Matt is a scientist turned entrepreneur, co-founder and CEO of Future Fields. He obtained his PhD in cell biology, also from the University of Alberta, and later held a postdoctoral position at one of Canada's top tissue engineering labs. During his graduate studies, Matt discovered the field of cellular agriculture and was the recipient of a New Harvest seed grant to study the lipid components of fetal bovine serum. While the majority of his academic career was spent in disease-based research, his passion for science and sustainability was the driving force behind the development of Future Fields' core technology, the EntoEngine, which you'll hear about shortly. So take it away, Jalene and Matt.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for having us.
Question, right? So tell us, how did you come to be in this place? How did you start this? And either one of you can answer that question.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you so much for the introduction. We are very excited to be here today to talk about what we're working on and meet other people interested in this area. So it's funny because we were actually reminiscing the other day about the starting of the company, because we were just at the New Harvest conference last week in New York. And I had been looking through my email, trying to find something from New Harvest, and stumbled across this email from August 2016, where I had sent Matt just a link to the New Harvest website, and the subject line was all caps, "So cool." And that was like, that was our first introduction to the field of cellular agriculture. And for those of you who don't know, New Harvest is this incredible donor-funded nonprofit organization that's working to advance the science of cultured meat by supporting a lot of the foundational research in the field. And so for us, finding out that this thing existed was really eye-opening and exciting, just to know that there was this potential to kind of meld all of our passions at the time, which related a lot to food security and sustainability and kind of social issues on my side. And then Matt, very interested at the time in science and animal welfare. And we just became so invested in the positive potential of cellular agriculture. And we knew that's where we wanted to spend our time and energy moving forward. So we officially founded I think incorporated the company in 2018, but we weren't really operational until late 2019. And we actually started out as a consumer-facing company that intended to create cell-based chicken products. So we developed a prototype, and things were going, okay, slowly. We didn't have a lot of resources to dedicate to it. It was kind of a evening and weekend endeavor for a very long time. And like a lot of the other companies in this space working on this, we faced a major challenge, and that was the cost of producing our product, which was very high at the time. And that was largely a result of the growth media that we were using. So cell growth media was not designed with thousands of 250,000 liter bioreactors in mind. And it was and still is quite expensive. And it's a huge input into the process of developing these cell-based agriculture products. So we set out to first overcome that challenge somehow for our own business. And so it was a pretty kind of serendipitous conversation, waiting in line one day for coffee and donuts at good old Canadian Tim Hortons, that just kind of led to the spark of this idea that would later become our EntoEngine platform. So at the time, Matt was finishing his PhD in cell biology and conducting a lot of research using Drosophila, or the common fruit fly, as a model organism. And luckily, I had very little understanding of the limits of science at the time, and just kind of was like, why don't you just mash these two problems together? And I think that was, the initial spark for how EntoEngine was born. So without getting into the technical details, we had developed this way to produce recombinant proteins, including growth factors for growth media using fruit flies. So later in 2019, we got into this really great agri-food tech accelerator program called GROW that was based out of Singapore. And they basically helped us to refine our business model and then kind of switch to focusing exclusively on creating growth factors for cell growth media instead of these consumer products that we had kind of been dabbling in. So basically, instead of keeping this solution in-house vertically integrated to our own processes, we decided it made a lot more sense to share it with other companies that were facing the same challenge. So then after that, we got into Y Combinator, and things just kind of kept escalating, I guess you could say. So we were able to hire our first few team members in 2020 and continue to validate our technology. We launched our first product, an FGF2 growth factor for use in cell growth media. That was in January 2021. And then we've since launched 3 more products. We've built out our own, a large team to 30 incredible people, a 14,000 square foot facility which houses our lab and office space. And that brings us, I guess, to the latest chapter of Future Fields. So we're really expanding the reach of our platform now beyond just cellular agriculture into new markets that can also benefit from an incredibly efficient, scalable, sustainable method of producing recombinant proteins. And so with that, we're scaling our facility to meet the next set of our growth milestones. So, cell ag, it is an industry that we're very passionate about, but we've recognized, especially over the last year, that our platform can do so much more, and just really come to realize how massive the sustainability benefits are compared to legacy expression systems like yeast or E. coli. So now we're much more broadly focused on leveraging the benefits of our technology to decarbonize biotech on a much bigger scale.
Amazing. Thank you. And just to go back a little bit, like fruit flies, why fruit flies? Tell us what makes them special in this space. Because I don't like them in my house, but this will be great.
Yeah, my joke is this because they scale themselves, right? You know, in your house, like you can't stop them.
That's right.
Yeah,
Matt, you can probably take that one.
Yeah.
I think the better question is why not fruit flies? I think there's so many benefits to this. So, I mean, the big thing is, like Jalene alluded to, Drosophila have been used as a model organism to study biological processes, human diseases for a really long time. We're talking 120 years now of scientific research on fruit fly biology. We know more about the Drosophila genome than we know about human genome. And in the process of this scientific research, a lot of different genetic tools have been developed. This is a highly genetically amenable genome. So that means it makes them like a really good system for biological research. but has never really been applied to biomanufacturing. And that's what we're doing, is taking this amazing genetic tool that was developed in academia and using it for biomanufacturing. So we can leverage, again, 120 years of scientific research to our advantage. Of course, we've done a lot on top of that. We've done our own, we've come up with our own innovations to utilize this, but that's this big advantage we have, is all of this wealth of knowledge that's been built around it. But the key advantages of our system, with regards to legacy systems, like Jalene mentioned, yeast, E. coli, sometimes mammalian cells. So all of those systems, they're cell-based or microbe-based. They're being grown in massive bioreactors, really big fermentation tanks that are very costly. Given 220,000 liter bioreactor can be like $250,000. Takes a lot of infrastructure. They're very energy intensive, very costly to operate. They produce a lot of waste in the process. I mean, you think about a 20,000 liter bioreactor full of E. coli. What do you do with that after you've harvested or extracted your recombinant protein? You can't just dump 20,000 liters of E. coli down the sink. It needs to be treated, and all of these things have really created challenges with innovating any further in the recombinant technology space. These are systems that have been around for decades, and in our opinion, and I think most people, has kind of reached their maximum in terms of the efficiencies of how much better they can get. So with Drosophila, with an insect-based expression system, I mean, number one, it's more cost effective, and we have validated that already. And that's because insects are so bloody cheap to rear. They live off a very inexpensive feedstock. They're incredibly efficient at bioconversion. The amount of feedstock that you can give them, and then they'll turn into biomass. It's incredible. I mean, it's more efficient than probably any other organism in the world, with regards to insects, and very scalable, because the infrastructure costs are low, and we don't produce any waste in the upstream. And that's something we can talk about more later, is like all of the residual biomass that we generate after the recombinant protein has been harvested can actually be valorized and turned into other valuable products, as opposed to creating waste, which again is typically what these legacy systems are doing. And then the last piece is the sustainability component, and that's why we're talking about decarbonizing biotech, because legacy systems are this really overlooked source of carbon emissions. And if we want to apply recombinant technology to new industries like cellular agriculture and supporting them with these key inputs, if we try to use those legacy systems, it's going to basically negate any of the environmental benefits we'd see from those industries, because that supply chain is just going to be so incredibly carbon intensive. Our internal calculations, we found we're about 8,200 times less carbon intensive than legacy systems, because of the efficiency of insects versus microbes. So in summary, why fruit flies? Because it's cheaper, it's more scalable, and it's more sustainable. And that's really like the thesis of our value proposition as a company.
I'm going to jump here really quickly too, Matt. I just want to echo something that Jalene said, and in our prior phone call, she extrapolated on this one. The way you describe the biomanufacturer, it almost sounds like it's a cold clinical factory that these insects are just chained to their desks, and all they do is excrete this recombinant protein. But Jalene, you said that you could walk by, open the cages, and they're so happy they won't leave the barn. They'll just sit. Can you talk about the animal welfare? Because I know that would be a concern for some of the constituencies out there.
Yeah, so it's funny because it's a really polarizing response when we bring something like that up. Some people laugh and they're like, "Oh my God, are you kidding? You think fruit flies, like, they have these sorts of feelings?" And I think the science around can fruit flies feel pain, etc., is a bit gray. We always just err on the side of, okay, they can. These organisms are capable of suffering, I guess. So the reason we take that into consideration is because we want to build our practices in such a way that we are not inflicting any undue potential suffering to these micro livestock. We've consulted with insect activists and philosophers and animal welfare people on what sort of practices should we implement to ensure that we aren't causing any potential suffering. And one of the key signs of unhappiness in insects is escape behavior. Basically, they're trying to frantically get out of their cage. And like Jalene said, a lot of with our insects, I mean, you can take the lid off and most of them are just going to hang out. They're not going to leave, because why would they? They have a ready source of nutrition, high density nutrition, plenty of mates, no predators. We create the conditions that insects, and specifically fruit flies, love. And that's in stark contrast to traditional animal agriculture in industrialized farming. That's the big problem with animal welfare with respect to cattle, pigs, etc. Is you're putting them in conditions they're not meant to be in, and so clearly there's a high degree of suffering. Whereas with insect agriculture, typically you're creating environments that they love, and I think that's one of the strong arguments, along with all the other benefits of insect agriculture, is in large part we are creating environments that they prefer and are very similar to what they would experience in the wild.
I think that's such an interesting area. I'm very excited about this, Matt, and it really takes us down another path. One thing that I'm kind of interested in, I guess because I don't know some of the backstory of the conversation, is how do you actually train them to then produce? So what's the way that they, go faster, or how do you make them go faster to get what you need out of them?
Yeah. So we, to get them to produce the things that we want, which are recombinant proteins, it's done through genetic engineering. So basically we take the gene, which encodes for a particular protein. The protein could be a growth factor, could be a vaccine, could be insulin. Genes are basically what encodes for a particular protein product. So we take that gene and we insert it into the Drosophila's genome, and then that happens stably. It gets stably integrated into their genome. So we are genetically engineering the insect, and this is done in such a way that it creates a stable strain. So we create a stable strain for each individual product. And that means because it's integrated into their genome, they pass it on to their progeny. So this is basically a one-time process per product. So you create a strain, for example, we have a strain that produces FGF2. Once that's done, this is a one-time process. We have the stable strain. And then from there, we propagate them just by allowing them to mate and reproduce. And that gives you the ability to scale up production of a given strain very quickly, but also have an ongoing stable supply of that, which again, coming back to legacy systems, is not the case. You don't keep these cultures of E. coli going forever. They're started as a small starter culture. They're built up to a large size, and then you harvest and then you restart that process every time over and over and over again. Whereas for us, we just kind of build up a strain and just let them keep reproducing. And then so you're constantly able to harvest. So to come back to your question, Rache, how we do it is just through genetic engineering.
So this is really great. I'm curious what you see as potential impediments standing in your way to continuing to move forward, investment, industry acceptance, strategic partnerships. What keeps you up at night?
Our daughter keeps us up at night.
Oh yeah. Aside from that, I think probably right now top of mind is capital. Just it's a tough market for anyone to be raising in right now. And although our company is actually very capital efficient, especially for a biotech company, it still is our biggest bottleneck right now. So, we commercialized our first product within 18 months of being operational with less than $2 million. And so for us, like, the science is settled. We have our technology. We know it works. Of course, there's still continuous optimization that we can do. But we know what the EntoEngine platform is capable of. We have our team in place. We have very few engineering challenges left, thanks to our incredible engineering team. We know how to scale. We know where we want to scale. We've secured our expansion facility. We just need the money to do it faster. So I'd say that's the position we're in right now. I don't know if Matt has anything to add to that.
Can I ask a question though before Matt answers that? So can I ask why faster? Is there like a pending group of folks who are going to try to do this quicker than you, or, you know, is the market really needing that much product? Why speed?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's a bit of both. I mean, I don't know what's happening behind the curtain of every competitor. We don't know. Obviously there's always that urgency to move faster. Within like the cell ag market and cultivated meat space, certainly there is demand for more product. Like we've talked about, our system does scale very well, so the ability to produce more and more is, I'd say, simpler, less capital intensive than probably most other systems, but still does require capital. I mean, any technology company, especially biotech, does need capital. And so, like Jalene said, that's kind of our biggest constraint and is the limiting factor of how fast we can move. But even beyond cell ag, like Jalene mentioned at the start, we're starting to realize the benefits of our platform more broadly and how it does apply to industries and markets outside of cell ag. So with that, we want to capitalize on that. We want to be able to move faster and, you know, develop new products, you know, grow the variety of recombinant proteins and growth factors out there. It's immense. So, you know, we have 4 products launched. There's hundreds we could be producing. So, you know, you just always want to be moving faster. It's never fast enough. And when capital is kind of the gas in the engine for that, you know, you want more gas in the engine so you can move faster.
So
I'm sorry, go ahead, Rachel.
Oh, I just had a side note. So yesterday I had an opportunity to go to the CARE building in New York City. It's, you know, my friend Jason works there and he's a biotech guy. The company itself is Deerfield Capital. I don't know if you guys are familiar, but they have this beautiful renovation that they did. It's stunning. And it's basically 13 floors of biotech scientists, all like building the future, right? And so I'm walking into this space and they have this gorgeous window display, and all around the window display are these plants, and they have these little like cubes, these beautiful little cubes of colored sticky pads because they have fruit flies. And so this is the largest investment capital company in your space, and they have a fruit fly problem. So my recommendation is that maybe we make an introduction on how you can solve that by creating a new technology that they could then sell. So I am going to make an introduction and see if there's a mutual relationship there. But all kidding aside, I think this is an area that I would ask as we kind of continue down the conversation to think outside of just the cell-based meat ag industry. And I'd love to understand where else the product could be helpful. Again, my background is food as medicine. I'm interested in bridging food and healthcare and figuring out the way in which we can solve some of the world's biggest problems using products that exist right now in the food and technology field. So like maybe we can use that after Andrew dives in. I'd like to, with his question, I'd really like to understand a little bit more about that and how we can look at this as an overall industry acceptance way beyond food.
And it wasn't so much as a question. I just wanted you to expand upon one point, because Jalene, I know when we spoke earlier, and Matt, just hearing your conversation there too, you don't seem to view scalability as a major impediment. So, you know, we'll make up a name, like if Upside all of a sudden wanted to change and use your formula there, it didn't sound, and correct me if I'm wrong, that would be too much of an issue for you.
No, exactly. I mean, again, the beauty of the Drosophila system is how fast it scales. To give you an example, to root that in some numbers, we can scale a given strain from basically 0. So if you started with like a vial of flies, like a tiny amount, you could scale that to 120 metric tons per day of production in just 60 days, because that's how fast they proliferate. The intergenerational the fecundity rate, a given female fruit fly lays two eggs per hour. So, they're producing 50 progeny per day potentially. So it's just an incredibly scalable system when all the bottlenecks are removed.
And the way that we scale is in a modular fashion. So we know exactly what our footprint is going to be. We know exactly like what the conditions need to be to scale, because it's not like we're moving into a bigger system. We're just moving our existing system into a bigger facility. So that makes it a lot easier because it removes a lot of the variables. But just to Matt's point, I wish we had a screen grab of this or something, because one day a couple months ago, our engineers were presenting on some of their scaling plans, and he had oh, you can explain it better, Matt, but there was a graph that was basically showing like biomass outputs, and it was like we weren't that far off from filling, I think it was like the Milky Way galaxy with fruit flies, like at the trajectory.
We could get to the mass of the Milky Way galaxy within 365 days of scaling. And obviously, like, it's very cheeky, like it's not logical, but it just kind of speaks to the immense scalability of an insect system.
So I have a question. Since people may or may not have noticed, you have the same last name, you riff off of each other really well. You're married. What's that like, running a company with your spouse, starting a company with your spouse?
So you go ahead first. We'll both answer this.
I recently heard Matt, someone asked him this at the conference last week, and he said, what did you say? Great for business, hard on the marriage. And I was like, oh, well, that's somewhat accurate. Yeah, I think there are a lot of benefits to having a co-founder that you can be real with all the time. It's like makes for very open communication. And I think I would find it very challenging to be working on something the amount that we work on it, on evenings and weekends, if the other person didn't really deeply understand why I care so much about that. So I think there's definitely a lot of advantages, but we you have to be very good at putting boundaries in place. Otherwise things happen. Like I wake up at 2 a.m. and wake up Matt to ask him a work question because it's on my mind. So it's like we're trying to put boundaries in place on those things. But yeah, I think overall there's a lot of benefits to being able to do it. I don't know if you have anything to add, Matt.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have anything to compare it to. We're both first-time founders. We've never run a company before with anyone else, but maybe that is just my naivety, but I can't imagine doing it any other way. Like all the benefits that Jalene listed, I think there's so many advantages to it. And on the flip side, it's equally as hard because Jalene said setting boundaries, but we're still really bad at that. We come home whatever time, 5-ish, shortly after 5, and it's constantly like, okay, let's not talk about work till after Rose, our daughter, goes to bed at whatever it is, whatever time she decides to go to bed that day, 7:30, 8 o'clock, and it just inevitably bleeds into the conversation, and it's such a big part of our life. It's all encompassing, and so it is challenging to kind of bookend your life that way. I think it's something we're working on. She's turning 3 right away. She's almost 3.
So just give it 2 more years and then you won't have an option because she'll just interrupt you.
Oh yeah.
I mean, she kind of already does that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Trying to have a serious work conversation and she's yelling, "Mommy, read. Mommy, read." I'm like, okay.
I love it. So it's already starting. She's going to be the disruptor that helps with the bookends.
Yeah.
But she loves the fruit flies. So
yeah. Yeah, sometimes
can we come back?
No,
go ahead. I'm sorry. I'm totally interrupting. I'm being very rude. I am sorry because I'm very interested in the answer to the question I asked before. And I'm hoping that's okay to ask, but how else can this work? Because I guess scale aside, and I have very specific belief systems around that. So I would like to follow up later. It doesn't have to be on this call to kind of discuss that piece of it, because it looks to me like you really have an opportunity in market today. So what else and what other markets could you really support with? How can you see growth and expansion into a position of profitability? Love to understand a little bit more of your strategy there and what you see.
Yeah, I mean, there's there's tons of possibilities within the recombinant protein space. I mean, like I mentioned, there's hundreds of options here. I mean, kind of the high value ones are things like therapeutics, vaccines. There's a lot of most, with the exception of like the latest mRNA technology, most vaccines are protein based and they're produced recombinantly. So I mean, there's a huge opportunity in that, and we've seen over the last 2.5 years the importance of biomanufacturing capabilities with regards to proteins in the vaccine space. So there's that, which is obviously a massive market. I mean, I think therapeutics broadly is like $300 billion or something like that. But there's even things like in the food and bev space, milk proteins, for example, that are added to, protein powders or infant formula, other ingredient-based things. Some of this stuff is traditionally sourced from milk mining. They basically take massive amounts of milk and they extract specific proteins out of it, lactoferrin, alpha-lactalbumin. These are things that we can readily produce in our software system. The economics of that is a bit more challenging because the scale is massive and the cost, the unit cost is much lower. It's very different from like a therapeutics from a financial perspective, but there is that potential. And we do know through some conversations and some of the relationship building we've done, there seems to be a push towards recombinant sources of specific ingredients like this from large manufacturers. So I think that that's a big potential for us. We also have this new product that we've soft launched. We haven't really announced it yet, and we are kind of keeping a tight lid on that for now, but could have some really interesting applications in things like infant formula, which I'm sure you guys probably heard there's a huge shortage right now globally. And so there's this push for improved manufacturing of things like infant formula and ways to improve that, ways to make it more like human breast milk because of the many advantages that you get from breast milk versus infant formula. So this is something that we're pretty excited about. So I guess the short answer is there's many things, and that doesn't even include the insect byproducts that I've mentioned, that I have brought up, taking the residual biomass, turning that into useful high value components.
Thank you. That's really great. And on that new product launch, what is your timing for go live?
That's a good question. I don't know.
The reason I ask is because there's several people that are working on this today. Che Young is somebody I'd really like to introduce you to if you don't know her. Her product originally went to market as Sugar Logic, and now she's renamed it to be human spelled backwards. I can't say that word, but I know it exists. It's like but it's an amazing product, and I know that there are people like her that are trying to scale this now because of this issue. So if you can come to market and really fill this pain point today, that feels like an amazing specialty asset that we could lend against.
Definitely.
We're definitely happy to have discussions with potential partners right now before launching it formally. So yeah, very open to that.
Yeah.
And if I could just jump in really quickly, I know in our last insect call and some others that I've had as well, FRAS enters into the conversation from a regenerative agriculture perspective, especially with the difficulty in getting inputs for farming. I would assume there is a FRAS as well. That's part of. I'm not sure how big the FRAS would be, and probably not as big as a cricket FRAS, but maybe you make up for it in volume.
Oh yeah, we're already looking at starting to get into product development of some of these side streams, and FRAS is a big one for us. We haven't invested a lot of time and resources into that, but it is kind of on our roadmap. The problem is right now with the scale that we're at, scale of production, we're not producing meaningful volumes of things like FRAS. So it's hard for us to actually make a move into that and be competitive, because we need to be scaled significantly larger to do that. So we're kind of focused on more high value, small scale products like the recombinant proteins, chitosan, for example, because chitin makes up the exoskeleton of insects, crustaceans. we have a process for isolating chitin and turning it into chitosan now. There's some more niche applications of that and are more high value, but in the long term, FRAS is definitely a big part of the roadmap.
Rachel, do you want to jump back in there, or do you start asking my quirky questions?
Yeah, sure. Okay. Well, I guess before we move on to quirky questions, because that was so fun. Like, I guess one question I would ask is, how can the people that are on this call today help you? Like, what are things that you, outside of strategic partners, investors, I think we're very clear on that. But what if there was like pie in the sky ideas? What would be helpful to you that we could provide?
So you want to go first?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, top of mind comes to just capital, because it's, you know what they say, you're always raising. So we're always interested in meeting potential investors, partners, customers. I think, you know, just on the side of new markets, new applications, there are definitely, like, it's basically the opportunities are endless. So if there are some less conventional applications of recombinant proteins that maybe we're not aware of, that there might be demand, you know, we'd love to find partners to explore those uses more, basically just additional new markets, or, you know, maybe things like very high value proteins for use in therapeutics or different pharmaceutical applications. Always interested in connecting with people just who are generally interested in our mission of decarbonizing biotechnology. So others who are passionate about climate tech and ag tech and working on those sorts of things. I don't know. Can you think of anything more strategic, Matt?
I think that covers most of it. I hate to always bring it back to capital, but you know, I will anyways. You know, if anyone, especially in like the Canadian ecosystem, is aware of you know, good sources of grant capital, those sorts of things. Obviously we try to, I feel like there's so many different programs out there. It's hard to know which ones are worthwhile applying to, which ones are worth or more like suitable for the types of things that we're doing. So if anyone's aware of like really good programs for that, please let us know.
I may have missed this. Did you guys say, are you raising currently? I mean, other than the fact that startups are always raising, like, are you in preparing for a seed, or, you know?
We were kind of in the process of raising our Series A, but the markets are not friendly to raising capital right now. We've decided to postpone that for the time being, at least like the kind of the more larger raise. You know, like Jalene said, we're a very capital efficient company, so our approach is kind of, you know, we can hunker down for a little bit, use the capital that we do have, and still do a ton of work, you know, produce a lot of results and progress with that, and hopefully markets improve in, say, a year's time. But also, like Jalene said, we're always raising. We're always interested in talking to investors who have a keen interest in future fields. So yeah.
So one thing can we come back to that we didn't really touch on, but we talked a lot about the food tech industry and how this can be helpful in food tech. And I think also, you know, it makes sense how you described it from a milk landscape. Is there anything else where you could use future fields, any other industry where this would be supportive?
Good question. I mean, anything that's protein based theoretically could be produced in our system, even if it's traditionally not sourced recombinantly. Again, these are things that we can produce. I mean, the kind of the broader R&D space is you know, is a big market that has potential for us. You know, all the academic researchers around the world that use a lot of recombinant proteins. Stem cell therapies. This is a kind of a new up and coming space in therapeutics, and they need to grow those stem cells. They need growth factors to do it because they're not going to use FBS. So they got to get into serum-free options, which means growth factors in a lot of them. So, so yeah, basically anything that requires a protein, technically we can produce. So these are markets that are available to us.
Okay, so it could be like skincare, or the other thing that I was thinking about was like healing. So, you have that the healing band-aids that you can put over that actually do try to bridge the gap. That to me feels like a really interesting space to look. And I know it requires R&D, but where my head is going is like, where else can we leverage this technology beyond food tech? Primarily because it seems to take such a long time to come to market. In food tech, it's like what we're 18 months out, basically. I would think at this point, maybe you guys know better than I do in terms of R&D and then hitting the shelf. Where could we get to the market quicker? And maybe that's an opportunity also to hit a point of break even faster.
Yeah, I think for us, like the R&D is pretty standard regardless of what product we're producing. Like we know what the timelines are, but it's regulatory that would be kind of the differing timelines on the other end. So definitely to your point, there are things that have a lower barrier to entry. So things like, cosmetics or different veterinary medicine applications, depending on where you are in the world, versus, things like a food ingredient that's or a therapeutic. Obviously, those are like much higher on the regulatory threshold side. So we're definitely keeping that in mind, and that's why some of these R&D applications are very good for us right now, because they have potential end uses in therapeutics further down the line. But right now, where they are at in their current process is like us providing something that's approved for R&D use only is totally great for that use case. So that's definitely where our efforts are focused right now outside of cellular agriculture.
I can't wait to have my future skincare from Future Field. So I'm very excited. Can't wait. Let's build it.
Yeah.
Collagen based or whatever you want to call it. I don't know if you can call it that.
Yeah, there's companies that are producing recombinant collagen, gelatin, those sorts of types of proteins that are used in I think broadly called cosmeceuticals. So that is an option for us as well.
Thanks for letting me take you down that rabbit hole. I'll to Andrew.
Well, I'm going to take you down another rabbit hole. Matt mentioned something called FBS, and I think we've been kind of dancing around the typical media for mortal stem cell growth, and as fetal bovine serum. And typically what happens is about 7% of cows that go to slaughter, typically dairy cows, are pregnant when they go to slaughter. And the embryo is extracted and desiccated, and then they put the serum through centrifuges to separate it. And I've studied the process. It actually is it's a very clean process. I know there's a lot of trepidation about how, it's a safe process. The issue is really expensive, number one, and number two, you've got an inherent ick factor built into that. And if you're a company like Upside, you want to make 1 billion hamburgers, it's going to be really hard to acquire that much fetal bovine serum to grow your mortal stem cells. And that's why Future Fields here is such a fantastic alternative to look at, especially if you can replicate the cell division growth and appropriate. Again, I'm not a scientist. I know they go to different types of cells. If you can make that happen and make sure the scaffolding and all the vascular systems are in place the same way you can with the fetal bovine serum, I mean, you're basically printing money at that point.
Yeah, exactly. And it was actually kind of interesting as we recently dug into kind of the origins of serum-free growth media recently, and it's been around for a while. So a bit more context: we've been growing cells in culture for a very long time, for decades. Traditionally, that's been done with FBS. You add FBS to a media, and it stimulates cells to grow very, very well. And we've been doing that for a very long time, and most researchers don't care. It works great. It is expensive, but they're using small enough amounts that it doesn't matter. But there has been development of serum-free media alternatives, and that propagated from the discovery of BSE, or mad cow disease. So once it was discovered that disease transmission from species to species could happen simply by exposure to an infectious protein or a prion, that drove a sense of urgency to innovate and develop serum-free media options, because it's used in biomanufacturing. So you don't want to manufacture a therapeutic that has FBS in the process, because you risk BSE transmission to the patient. So it's been around for a while, but again, still very, very costly. And so once cell ag came around, obviously FBS was not an option, and some companies use it for R&D purposes, but I think there's a general understanding they're moving away from it, moving to serum-free options, which means growth factors. But again, those are expensive, so ergo future fields, and that's why we exist. But yeah, I just thought it was interesting to learn about like where serum-free media came from, because it wasn't cell ag, it was way before cell ag.
I mean, in biomedicine, and I get the BSE angle there. I mean, if you need a new aorta for your child or something, you're probably not going to turn up your nose at fetal bovine serum as the growth media. But if you're looking at, you know, buying a hamburger from McDonald's or Hardee's or Tim Hortons or something, you definitely prefer it not to be there. And I would suspect, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that the fact that the fruit flies are cold-blooded, BSE will never enter even into those conversations, correct?
Yeah, exactly.
So for the quirky question part of our conversation here, I did notice that the name of your company, the Future Fields, appears to be an alliteration of the main livestock that you have there. And I was just curious if there was a line that could be drawn between those two, or if it just was happenstance and you just happened to like the letter F.
No, because you know what? The name was decided well before flies came into the picture. It was like our first, you know, meeting about starting a company. We came up with the name, and I think we just like had a bunch of options. We thought it, I don't know, sounded catchy. I don't know, Jalene.
Yeah, I
but
think
well before flies were around.
Yeah, it's interesting how it's kind of stood the test of time, because we definitely had more of a, you know, agricultural lens when we first went into this, but now people generally interpret it as like future fields of, you know, research of, you know, just like there's it can be interpreted in many ways. And even our logo, I think it's interesting to see now how sort of like the interpretation of it has evolved to where we're at now, what we're working on, which is a bit more, you know, kind of biotech, larger application of biotech than we thought we would be when we first started out. So it's really stood the test of time.
Excellent. Christina, I know you've got to run in a few minutes. Do you have any closing questions or something that hasn't been answered yet that you'd love to hear about?
Well, I'm curious, are you aware of the AgTech Canadian Technology Accelerator? Okay,
No, honestly, we are not. We've not heard of it.
We'll be doing a webinar about it next week, so I'm going to invite you, and I would love to see you apply. I think you could be a great fit. So I'll leave it at that, but also feel free to reach out to me anytime. I can help connect to investors and some of the other things we talked about. So love to stay connected.
And Christina, if you could drop a link to that in the chat box, just in case there's other folks out there that are either listening now or will watch the recording later, they can jump in there. And definitely a thumbs up for that. Christina has been kind enough to invite me in sometimes for the demo days, and every once in a while she has a company that's got a need that she thinks that I can help them out with. So I've interfaced with several of those companies as well. It's been a real pleasure and a joy. So, and Christina, thank you so much. Rach, what questions haven't we asked yet? Or
I'm excited to follow up, so give me a call.
There we go. And then Jalene and Matt, I'll give you guys the last few words here in closing. What questions did we not ask you that you really wish we had? And what is the best way for someone to follow up with you with any kind of information that you may have discussed today?
Maybe I'll start with the latter. I think our website, futurefields.io, LinkedIn, I'm very active and connected on LinkedIn. So find me on LinkedIn, my email, matt@futurefields.io. Yeah, it's pretty easy to find us, and we're pretty well connected to every medium that we have out there.
Yeah, and I'll just add the shout out for Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, and why you should relocate your biotech company here or start a company here, because yeah, it's so interesting. You know, even just coming straight last week, like I mentioned, from New Harvest, talking to lots of new companies across Canada and, you know, North America and other parts of the world. But the big problem everyone has is how it's so expensive to scale up when you actually need like a physical footprint for your operations. And so, you know, Edmonton is such a great place to grow a business. your money goes very far here. So like when we tell investors what we managed to do with our first $2 million, they're always shocked. The cost of living is low, the cost of renting commercial space, salaries are relatively low compared to other tech hubs around North America. And so it makes for a very capital efficient operation. We have an incredible untapped talent pool here from the University of Alberta. We've hired, almost our entire R&D staff from there, and just like incredibly talented, smart, top-notch individuals, which is amazing. And I think people kind of underestimate how incredible our university is here. Provincial and federal grant opportunities are abundant. I think it's funny because it's like every day we hear about a new one or some program that we haven't heard about, but especially for companies working on R&D, there are huge advantages to being here. And just Edmonton is a great place to grow a business. The startup community is super supportive and doing really great things to build out an ecosystem. So yeah, I would just like to give the shout out to here and why it's, we're constantly telling people like, move your company here because your dollar will go 10 times as far and it's a great place to live. So I think we can definitely credit our geography and a lot of our success to date.
And it's a great place to live. What is it like? The North America's largest urban green space, I think, in the River Valley. And I mean, it's cold. It's cold a lot of the time, but buy a good coat and you're fine. Yeah,
things are getting warmer, so it's basically free air conditioning.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, unfortunately. Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well,
I love that.
Thank you. I mean, I really am. I'm so honored to be able to sit here and chat with you. I know you guys have got a lot of different things that you could do, a lot of different stages you could be on. There's probably a whole bunch of hungry fruit flies in the back there. You got to go feed at some given time. So I do appreciate you jumping on here. And for those of you in the audience, if you like what you hear about insects, our next talk will be on the 22nd of June. And I'll be talking to Trina Chasen, who is the owner of Avipost, one of the largest cricket farms in the country. And I've known Trina for many years, and she's taught me more about crickets than I think I've ever thought I would know about crickets. Fun fact is the little baby crickets are called pinheads, and they will seek out drops of water to drown themselves in. So watering crickets is always a challenge. So please check my LinkedIn profile. You'll see it there. And once again, Christina, Rache, Jalene, Matt, audience, thank you so much for coming out today and joining us. Please follow up with your questions. And that's what I got here.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah,